Hi ho, score listeners. Here we go again with the Telltale Heart. Oh, and I still have a little bit of a getting my water bottle getting my water bottle ready to hit it. I got a sore throat still and a head hurt, and I know it's allergies. Hurting head and eyeball pressure, all that lovely stuff. Okay, last thing I said was courage. Let's see, I'll read the last sentence. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my, or two sentences. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Oh, Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of midnight, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you would think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. Ooh. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. Ha ha. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicious of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale, and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for a breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations. But the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble me no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here. It is the beating of this hideous heart. He told on himself. He must have been mad to kill somebody because of, and then dismember them. All right, well, daggone, that didn't take long. Let's see what else. I would love to read H.P. Lovecraft. I've just heard he's good in the horror genre, but I don't think I've ever read anything of his. Let me see if any of these titles jump out at me. Here's one called The Bug. The Bug. And let's see, The Terrible Old Man. The Tree, The Unnameable. The Shunned House. Horror at Red Hook. Let's see, From Beyond. Let's see what Old Bugs is like. Oh, it's one of those. The print is so tiny. Okay, it says Sheehan's Pool Room. And again, it's called Old Bugs. Bugs. Sheehan's Pool Room, which adorns one of the lesser alleys in the heart of Chicago's Stockyard District, is not a nice place. Its air, freighted with 1,000 odors such as Coleridge may have found at Cologne, too seldom knows the purifying rays of the sun. but fights for space with the acrid fumes of unnumbered cheap cigars and cigarettes which dangle from the coarse lips of unnumbered human animals that haunt the place day and night. But the popularity of Shihans remains unimpaired, and for this there is no reason, a reason obvious to anyone who will take the trouble to analyze the mixed stenches prevailing there. Over and over the fumes and sickening closeness arises an aroma once familiar throughout the land, but now happily banished to the back streets of life by the edict of a benevolent government, the aroma of strong, wicked whiskey, a precious kind of forbidden fruit indeed in this year of grace, 1950. Shihans is the acknowledged center to Chicago's subterranean traffic in liquor and narcotics, and as such has a certain dignity which extends even to the unkempt attaches of the place. But there was until lately one who lay outside the pale of that dignity, one who shared the squalor and filth but not the importance of Shihans. He was called Old Bugs, and was the most disreputable object in a disreputable environment. What he had once been, many tried to guess, for his languages and mode of utterance when intoxicated to a certain degree were such as to excite wonderment, but what he was presented less difficulty, for Old Bugs in superlative degree epitomized the pathetic species known as the bum, or the down and outer. Whence he had come, no one could tell. One night he had burst wildly into Shihans, foaming at the mouth and screaming for whiskey and hashish. And I hadn't heard that in a long time. And having been supplied in exchange for a promise to perform old jobs, had hung about ever since, mopping floors, cleaning cuspidors and glasses, and attending to 100 similar menial duties in exchange for the drink and drugs which were necessary to keep him alive and sane. He talked but little, and usually in the common jargon of the underworld, but occasionally, when inflamed by an unusually generous dose of crude whiskey, would burst forth into strings of incomprehensible polysyllables and snatches of sonorous prose and verse which led certain, I can't hardly see, habitus to conjecture that he had seen better days. One steady patron, a bank defaulter undercover, came to converse with him quite regularly, and from the tone of his discourse ventured the opinion that he had been a writer or professor in his day. But the only tangible clue to Old Bug's past was a faded photograph which he constantly carried about with him. The photograph of a young woman of noble and beautiful features. This he would sometimes draw from his tattered pocket, carefully unwrapped from its covering of tissue paper, and gaze upon for hours with an expression of ineffable sadness and tenderness. It was not the portrait of one whom an underworld denizen would be likely to know, but of a lady of breeding and quality, garbed in the quaint attire of 30 years before. Old Bugs himself seemed to also belong to the past, for his nondescript clothing bore every hallmark of antiquity. He was a man of immense height, probably more than 6 feet, though his stooping shoulders sometimes belied this fact. His hair, a dirty white and falling out in patches, was never combed, and over his lean face grew a mangy stubble of coarse beard, which seemed always to remain at the bristling stage, never shaven yet never long enough to form a respectable set of whiskers. His features had perhaps been noble once, but were now seamed with the ghastly effects of terrible dissipation. At one time, probably in middle life, he had evidently been grossly fat, but now he was horribly lean, the purple flesh hanging in loose pouches under the blurry eyes and upon his cheeks. Altogether, old Bags was not pleasing to look upon. And I hate to do it. I know I haven't read very long, but my head is banging. So I want to go take something for it. Oh, and it's time for the secret yarnery. Krista time. Love you bunches and see you tomorrow. Bye bye. Love ya. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Bye bye.